The taste of betrayal is bitter, but revenge has a flavor all its own. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but some truths need to see the light of day. My name is Thomas Reeves, and this is how I lost, and reclaimed, my family's legacy, teaching my own brother the true cost of betrayal. The Reeves family name had been synonymous with fine dining in Chicago for 3 generations. My grandfather started with a single diner in 1952, my father transformed it into an upscale restaurant, and together, my brother Daniel and I built it into a chain of 12 high-end establishments across the Midwest. Each location had its own character, but they all shared our family's commitment to excellence. Our father made sure we understood that legacy from the moment we could walk, the countless hours he spent teaching us everything from proper wine pairings to the art of managing kitchen staff. When Dad passed away 2 years ago, he left the business to both of us. Together, he'd said in his will, because together you're stronger than apart. Daniel and I had always been different. He was the charming face of the business, while I handled operations and logistics, but we made it work. Or so I thought. I should have seen the signs earlier. The late-night meetings I wasn't invited to. The sudden interest Daniel took in our accounting procedures. The way he started excluding me from major decisions, always with a plausible excuse. You're so busy with the kitchen renovations at the flagship location, Tom. I didn't want to burden you with this. Or, it was just a routine supplier meeting, nothing you needed to worry about. But I was blind to it all, lost in the daily grind of running our restaurants. Even when some of our most loyal staff members tried to warn me, I dismissed their concerns. After all, this was my brother we were talking about. The same person who'd stood up for me in school, who'd helped me ask out my first girlfriend, who'd been my best man at my wedding. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut on a random Tuesday morning. I was reviewing our quarterly reports when I noticed discrepancies in our ownership structure. Diving deeper, I discovered a web of shell companies and carefully manipulated documents. Daniel hadn't just been making decisions without me, he'd been systematically writing me out of our family's legacy. He'd sold off 8 of our 12 restaurants to a restaurant management group, keeping only our 4 least profitable locations under family control. The papers he'd had me sign months ago, documents I'd trusted him with because he was my brother, had effectively reduced my ownership stake to nothing. The money from the sales, nearly $40 million, had already been moved offshore. When I confronted him in his office, his response chilled me to the bone. He didn't even try to deny it. Business is business, Tom, he said, leaning back in our father's old leather chair. You were always too soft for this industry. Too concerned with tradition, with keeping things the way Dad wanted them. The market doesn't care about sentiment. This isn't about the market, I said, my voice shaking. This is about family. He laughed, actually laughed. Family? Wake up, brother. This is about survival. About taking opportunities when they present themselves. Dad's way of doing things is extinct. I left his office that day with nothing but a burning sense of betrayal and a determination that this wouldn't be the end of the story. Daniel might have thought he'd won, but he'd forgotten something crucial about me. I'd always been the patient one, the detail-oriented brother who could see patterns others missed. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I moved in with my best friend after having to sell my house, took a job as a line cook to make ends meet, and spent every free moment building my case. I hired Sarah Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who specialized in corporate fraud, using my last savings and the promise of a percentage if we won. Sarah was skeptical at first, but as we dug deeper into Daniel's dealings, her eyes lit up with predatory interest. He got sloppy, she told me one night, surrounded by stacks of documents. He was so focused on the big picture, he missed the details. The way he structured the sales, it's technically legal, but there are holes. Big ones. We found out that Daniel had rushed the deals through during a market downturn, selling our profitable locations for well below market value to a company that, upon investigation, had interesting connections to some of his personal investments. The new owners had already begun cutting corners, damaging the reputation my family had spent decades building. Sarah helped me approach the restaurant management group that had bought our locations. Armed with evidence of improprieties in the original sale and the threat of a very public lawsuit that would expose their own questionable practices, we negotiated a deal. They would sell the restaurants back to me at a fraction of what they'd paid, and in return, their involvement in the mess would stay quiet. But I wasn't done. While working on the ownership transfers, we discovered something else. Daniel had been cooking the books for years, even before Dad died. He'd been skimming profits, underreporting earnings, and playing fast and loose with tax laws. It was all there in the numbers, if you knew where to look. I took everything we found to the IRS and the FBI. The evidence was overwhelming, and they moved quickly. Within weeks, Daniel's accounts were frozen, and he was facing multiple federal investigations. I'll never forget the day he showed up at my tiny apartment, looking nothing like the polished restaurateur he'd been just months before. His designer suit was wrinkled, his eyes haunted. "Tom, please," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to help me. They're going to take everything. I'm your brother." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering our father's words about being stronger together. Then I remembered the look on Daniel's face when he'd laughed at me in his office. "You're right," I said quietly. "You are my brother. And that's why this hurts so much. But you made your choice, Daniel. Now you get to live with it." I shut the door on him that day, but I couldn't shut out the complicated emotions that followed. Triumph mixed with sadness, satisfaction tainted with loss. The restaurants were mine again, all 12 of them, and I've spent the last year rebuilding what Daniel nearly destroyed. Our reputation is recovering, our staff is loyal again, and our customers are returning. But success tastes different now. Every time I walk through one of our kitchens, every time I greet a regular customer or hire a new chef, I feel my father's absence more keenly. And yes, I feel Daniel's absence too, even though he brought this on himself. Daniel was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. Sometimes I get letters from him, apologies, explanations, pleas for reconciliation. I read them all, but I haven't answered any. Not yet. Maybe someday I will, when the wound isn't so fresh, when I can look at our family photos without feeling that stab of betrayal. For now, I focus on honoring our father's legacy the way it should be honored. Every morning, I walk into our flagship restaurant on Michigan Avenue, run my hand along the smooth mahogany bar our grandfather installed, and remind myself that some things are worth fighting for. Family heritage. Personal integrity. Justice. The restaurant industry is tough, but it's not about just survival, as Daniel claimed. It's about passion, about creating experiences that bring people together. It's about maintaining standards even when it would be easier to cut corners. Most of all, it's about trust, trust between owner and staff, between restaurant and customer, between family members. I've learned that trust, once broken, is like a fine wine glass shattered on marble floors. You can try to piece it back together, but it will never be quite the same. The best you can do is learn from the experience and be more careful with what remains. Last week, I found an old picture while cleaning out some files. It shows Daniel and me as kids, both of us in oversized chef's hats, helping Dad make Sunday dinner. We're laughing, covered in flour, completely unaware of what the future holds. I keep that photo in my desk drawer now. Not because I've forgiven Daniel, I haven't, but because it reminds me of something important. The choices we make shape not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. The Reeves family restaurants are thriving again, but they're different now. There's a weight to every decision I make, a consciousness that success built on betrayal isn't success at all. I've implemented profit sharing for long-term employees, started a culinary scholarship program in Dad's name, and made sure every supplier we work with shares our values. Sometimes, late at night when the last customers have left and the kitchens are quiet, I think about Daniel sitting in his cell, and I wonder if he understands yet. Not just what he lost, but why he lost it. I wonder if he realizes that his betrayal didn't just hurt me, it betrayed everything our family stood for. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but that's not quite right. The best revenge isn't about temperature at all, it's about timing, preparation, and attention to detail. Just like running a great restaurant. As for forgiving Daniel, that's a question I still can't answer. Maybe forgiveness, like a perfect souffle, can't be rushed. It rises in its own time, or not at all. For now, I'm focused on moving forward, on building something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. After all, that's what Dad would have wanted. Not the revenge part, perhaps, but the rebuilding. The dedication to excellence. The understanding that a family legacy is bigger than any one person's greed. Every morning, before we open for service, I gather the staff for our daily meeting. We talk about specials, about wine pairings, about maintaining the standards that made us great. But we also talk about trust, about integrity, about being part of something bigger than ourselves. And every morning, I look at their faces, some who've been with us since my father's time, others who are just starting their journey, and I know I made the right choice. Because in the end, this story isn't just about betrayal and revenge. It's about protecting what matters, about standing up for what's right, even when it hurts. The restaurants are doing better than ever now. We've even opened 2 new locations, bringing our total to 14. Each one carries our family name, but more importantly, each one carries our family's values. The real ones, not the twisted version Daniel tried to create. As for me, I'm different too. Harder in some ways, perhaps, but also more appreciative of loyalty when I find it. More conscious of the responsibility that comes with carrying on a legacy. More determined than ever to prove that success and integrity aren't mutually exclusive. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose what to do when family betrays you. I chose to fight back, to reclaim what was stolen, to prove that justice still matters. It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. And every time I see our restaurants full of happy customers, every time I smell the familiar aromas wafting from our kitchens, every time I see our staff working together like a well-oiled machine, I know that some betrayals, while painful, can lead to something stronger, something better, something more authentic than what was lost. That's my story. Not just of revenge, but of rebuilding. Of remembering what matters. Of making sure that sometimes, just sometimes, justice prevails over greed. And if there's one lesson in all of this, it's that the meals we share and the choices we make define us far more than the blood we share. That's something Daniel never understood, but something I'll never forget. The taste of betrayal may be bitter, but the taste of justice, that's a flavor worth savoring. The legal battle that brought Daniel down wasn't quick or clean. Sarah Chen, my lawyer, warned me from the start that corporate fraud cases are rarely straightforward, but even she was surprised by the complexity of Daniel's deceptions. We spent countless nights in her office, surrounded by financial statements and corporate filings, connecting dots that Daniel had deliberately scattered. "Your brother," Sarah said one night, rubbing her tired eyes, "he's either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. The way he layered these transactions, it's like a Russian nesting doll of fraud." She was right. Daniel hadn't just sold the restaurants, he'd created a complex web of shell companies and holding corporations, each transaction designed to obscure the previous one. The money trail led through 4 different countries and dozens of accounts. If he hadn't gotten overconfident, if he hadn't made a few crucial mistakes in his haste to finish the deal, we might never have caught him. The turning point came when we discovered his connection to the restaurant management group that bought our locations. Daniel had used a childhood friend as a front man, someone who owed him favors from their college days. This friend, when faced with federal investigators and the prospect of jail time, folded like a cheap napkin. His testimony revealed that Daniel had been planning this for years, even before Dad's death. He'd been systematically weakening our relationships with key suppliers, subtly undermining our staff's loyalty, all while maintaining his charming facade. The betrayal went deeper than I'd initially imagined. The federal prosecutors were particularly interested in a series of offshore accounts Daniel had set up in the Cayman Islands. He'd been siphoning money from our restaurants for years, skimming just enough from each location to stay under the radar. The total amount made even the seasoned IRS investigators whistle, over $12 million, carefully hidden and gradually accumulated over 8 years. But what really sealed Daniel's fate wasn't the financial fraud, it was the human cost. During the investigation, we uncovered evidence that he'd blackmailed several of our longtime employees to keep them quiet about his schemes. He'd threatened their jobs, their reputations, even their families in some cases. When these stories came out in court, I saw Daniel's carefully constructed image crumble completely. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as my brother stood before the judge. He'd lost weight in custody, his designer suits replaced by a plain button-down shirt and slacks. When given the chance to speak, he tried one last time to spin the situation. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying that familiar smooth confidence, "I admit I made mistakes, but everything I did was to modernize our family business, to keep it competitive in a changing market. My brother's traditional approach was driving us toward bankruptcy. I acted out of necessity, not malice." The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, wasn't impressed. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "I've been presiding over fraud cases for 27 years, and I've heard every possible justification for betraying trust. Yours isn't particularly original. You didn't act out of necessity, you acted out of greed and arrogance. Your family's restaurants were profitable, your employees were loyal, and your brother was a dedicated partner. You had everything most people spend their lives working toward, and you threw it away because you wanted more." She sentenced him to 8 years, plus restitution. As the bailiff led him away, Daniel looked back at me, and for the first time since this all began, I saw something real in his eyes, not calculation or charm, but raw, unfiltered regret. The aftermath of the trial brought its own challenges. Rebuilding trust with our staff wasn't easy, even after I reinstated those who'd been forced out under Daniel's management. Some wounds take time to heal, and the scars of betrayal don't fade quickly. I started holding monthly town hall meetings with all our employees, being completely transparent about our finances, our plans, our challenges. It was uncomfortable at first. Vulnerability isn't my natural state, but it was necessary. People needed to know that the new era of Reeves restaurants would be different. The renovation of our flagship location became a symbol of this transformation. We kept the classic elements that had made us special, the mahogany bar, the intimate lighting, the impeccable service, but modernized where it made sense. The kitchen was completely redesigned with input from our chefs. The wine cellar was expanded, and we added a private dining room named after our father. During the renovation, we found something behind an old wall unit, a small metal box that turned out to contain my grandfather's original recipes and notes from when he first opened the diner. Reading through his careful instructions, his passionate notes about quality and service, I felt a connection not just to our family's past, but to its future. These recipes became the foundation for a new initiative, a rotating heritage menu that celebrates our roots while incorporating contemporary techniques and ingredients. Each dish tells a story, not just about food, but about family, tradition, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The response has been overwhelming. Our regular customers appreciate the connection to our history, while new diners are drawn to the authenticity of our story. Food critics have taken notice too. The Chicago Tribune recently ran a feature about our renaissance, praising not just our cuisine but our commitment to ethical business practices. Last month, I received another letter from Daniel. Unlike his previous messages, this one was different, no excuses, no manipulation, just raw honesty. He wrote about having time to think in prison, about finally understanding what Dad had tried to teach us all those years ago. About realizing that success without integrity is just expensive failure. I still haven't responded, but I keep the letter in my desk, next to that old photo of us as kids. Sometimes, late at night when I'm doing the books or planning menus, I take them both out and look at them. The photo shows who we were, the letter hints at who Daniel might become, and the empty space between them represents all the choices that led us here. The hardest part of this whole experience hasn't been the legal battle, the financial strain, or even the betrayal itself. It's been learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. For months after discovering Daniel's deception, I questioned every decision I'd ever made, second-guessed every instinct. How had I been so blind? How had I missed the signs? But gradually, I've come to realize that trust isn't about being perfect or never being deceived. It's about having the courage to believe in something bigger than yourself, even after that belief has been shattered. It's about rebuilding, not just structures and systems, but faith in human decency. That's why I started the mentorship program at our restaurants. Twice a year, we select promising young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and provide them with comprehensive training in all aspects of the restaurant business. They learn everything from knife skills to wine appreciation to business management. More importantly, they learn about integrity, about the value of hard work and honest dealing. The program has already produced some amazing success stories. Maria, our first graduate, is now the sous chef at our newest location. James, who started in our second cohort, recently opened his own cafe with our guidance and support. Each of them carries forward not just culinary skills, but the values that my grandfather and father tried to instill in Daniel and me. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would think of all this. Would he be proud of how I protected his legacy? Would he be disappointed in how things ended with Daniel? Would he understand that sometimes protecting what's right means making hard choices? I like to think he would. Dad always said that running a restaurant was about more than just serving food, it was about creating experiences, building relationships, and maintaining standards. He taught us that every plate that leaves the kitchen carries our family's name and reputation with it. Now, when I walk through our restaurants, I see his lessons everywhere. In the way our staff works together, in the care we take with every dish, in the smiles of satisfied customers. The betrayal that nearly destroyed us has instead made us stronger, more resilient, more committed to our core values. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to understand what really matters. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important transformations. Sometimes you have to go through darkness to appreciate the light. As for Daniel, well, he still has 4 years left on his sentence. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him, but I'm learning that forgiveness isn't an all-or-nothing proposition. Maybe it's more like seasoning, something you add gradually, testing as you go, until the balance is right. In the meantime, I focus on moving forward, on building something that honors the past while embracing the future. Every morning, as I unlock the door to our flagship restaurant, I run my hand along that old mahogany bar and remember my grandfather's words, written in those recently discovered recipes: cook with love, serve with pride, and always remember that your name means something. The Reeves name does mean something, now more than ever. It stands for resilience in the face of betrayal, for the triumph of integrity over greed, for the power of doing things the right way even when the wrong way seems easier. And that, more than any revenge or justice, is the legacy I'm proud to carry forward.